Hello everyone, my name is Patricia Worby from Alchemy Therapies, and today I just wanted to talk a little bit about a personal experience of writing, because it's been asked of me actually just this morning. I had a messenger contact who asked me about how I got to write the book, and it's something I don't think I've ever talked about. So I thought I'd have a little session with you today about how and why I wrote the book, The Scar That Won't Heal, which is this one, which I wrote in 2016, I think it was. Might have even been 2015 now. And it's basically a book about trauma, but I haven't limited it to conventional ideas of trauma. So there are many books out there about trauma, about childhood abuse, alcoholism, all sorts of things like that. And because of my own experience growing up in what I like to think of as a normally dysfunctional family, I didn't have any of those experiences, but I did have a father who was chronically ill and who was hospitalized many times during my teenage years. And I had, he eventually died actually when I was 19. And I also had some family secrets that were kind of not talked about. There was always financial problems in terms of my dad's business was always a bit precarious. Various, run-of-the-mill sort of traumas, what I call everyday trauma. And it was my idea to write a book about that because no one else was really talking about trauma as an ordinary experience. And what I've now come to realize is that most people go through things like this in their childhoods. It's very difficult to get through a childhood without some sort of experience that's overwhelming, because that's the definition of trauma, really, is an experience that overwhelms your nervous system's capacity to cope. And we now know that the nervous system has many ways of dealing with this, but they're basically limited to three things. So the first thing is you will reach out for help. And this is your top level strategy, if you like, which we tend to call the social engagement system. And that's where you reach for a parent or a colleague or a friend, somebody to help you, to talk to connect with. And this is obviously a strategy that would work in, we hope, 9 times out of 10. But there are some childhoods and some families in which that help is not available. And that was obviously the case for me because, watching a father who's very ill, who could die at any moment, and is also struggling to keep going and keep the family supported is an almost impossible situation for a child. You can't intervene, there's nothing you can do. So reaching out for help isn't really possible because the very person you would reach out for help to is the person that's having the problem. So then you are reliant on the second system, which is commonly called fight and flight or sympathetic system. And that is to fight the thing that happens or to run away from it. And again, in childhood, that's very, very difficult because often our power is less than as an adult. We don't have access to fighting a lot of what goes on in our lives. And we certainly can't run away because our survival is predicated on being with our parents, who, after all, are there to protect and keep us safe. So when the nervous system isn't able to flee or fight the thing that's happening, there's a third system. And this is one that's only really recently been discovered. And that is the freeze or immobilisation response. And it's a very primitive system. And it tends to happen when you are overwhelmed by one thing that's just totally awful, or you are overwhelmed by a series of lesser things that are still cumulatively too much for your system. And I believe that's what happened to me. And it primes your brain to shut down and to be aware, hyper aware of threat. So you basically get symptoms of being on hyper alert. You're always looking out for danger. It can also in the longer term, it can give you physical symptoms as well, like pain and fatigue. That's another story. It's covered in the book, because eventually I did get chronic fatigue syndrome in my 30s. Recovered now, by the way. So if anybody tells you you can't recover, here I am. I don't have it. So unless I was misdiagnosed or I'm lying, then it isn't incurable. So basically, you've got these three systems, which is how we now understand that chronic exhaustive conditions comes about, is that you tend to revert to the lowest system with occasional forays into fight and flight. So you're basically existing at the lowest level where everything is shut down. Your energy systems are shut down. Your nervous system is hopeless and helpless. It's actually akin to preparation for death, because in animals, before they get eaten, if there's a predator around and they've been cornered and there's no fight and no flight left in them, this is the system it reverts to. And so in humans, imagine, we don't exactly go into total freeze. That's unlikely, although it does happen. People do dissociate, they do faint. A lot of these responses are seen as the classical type. But more often in chronic conditions, it's a gradual shutdown to this very, very poor functional state where nothing works properly and you're unable to get out of bed, you're unable to function. And actually, that's been in the news recently, because in the UK, we love our BBC, and the BBC have a very popular programme called Desert Island Discs, which has been running for over 50 years, I think. And the presenter of that, Kirsty Walk, announced yesterday she was taking a break, it said, because she has fibromyalgia. Now, fibromyalgia is a classic chronic exhaustive condition that manifests largely through the expression of extreme pain in the postural muscles of the neck, shoulders, back, sometimes also the legs. And it was said on the radio when they announced this that this is a chronic, incurable condition. Again, this misinformation. It is difficult to treat with the current medical model. That doesn't mean you can't heal. But you certainly won't heal through the methods that current modern medicine uses, because all they do is attack the symptoms. They suppress the symptoms. And symptoms, as I know and as I described in the book, are the body's way of giving you information. You may not like the information, and it may feel like your body's attacking you, but basically your body is giving you information, but it's in such a way that it's difficult for you to understand, because it's not in words. It's in feelings, sensations. And that's how the brain works, basically. It's how trauma is formed, as a sensation experience, not as a narrative. And that's why talking therapy doesn't tend to touch it. So that's a little summary of the book and why I wrote it. This isn't a sales pitch for the book. This is more about why and how one can get an idea and be inspired to share it with others. At the time I wrote the book, I had an idea what the book was going to be about. As I say, its working title was Everyday Trauma. And at that point, another book came out that seemed to deal with this, and it was called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's by a very famous author called Bessel van der Kolk. And it came out, and I bought it, and I read it, and my heart, I must admit, sank, because it felt like it covered everything that I was going to be talking about, body experience of trauma and how to resolve it. And so the only thing that then occurred to me was that I needed to add my own story into mine to make it relevant, and also the experience of working with people who have these symptoms. And so my book morphed from being purely about trauma to being more about the common symptoms of common experiences, with a little intro of my own story as an opener. And surprisingly, to me anyway. I published it, as I say, I think it was September 2015. And I'm not going to say it went to the New York Times bestseller list, because it didn't, but it gradually has picked up sales, and it's even been added to various book lists for some courses that I know of running in the more sort of holistic fields of health and well-being. So I'm glad to say it's taken off, and I've reissued it recently with an index and improved layout and a few additional things to make it up to date with current knowledge. And I've written another book on the microbiome called The World Within. That's out now. And I've used the same method to publish it with. I did it myself. I self-published. Now, I've blogged about this extensively on my website, alchemytherapies.co.uk. So if anybody out there is interested in becoming a non-fiction author, I can't talk about fictional writing because I don't know anything about that. But if you've got an idea and you want to write it down as a book, get in touch. I've learned a lot through doing and through failing. So I'm very happy to pass on my knowledge of how to lay out the text, how to format, how to edit, how to index as well, because these are all really valid skills for people when they're self-publishing. This year I'm actually going on a Hay House Writers Conference in October, where one of the lucky people there will be offered a book deal. So keep your fingers crossed for that one. The talking of Hay House, I actually was shopping yesterday and a book sort of literally fell into my lap off the shelf, and it's this one. The Universe Has Got Your Back, which I thought was a great title. I love titles because titles really tell you a lot about the person, don't they? They give you a sense of the spirit of the writer. My title, by the way, The Scar That Won't Heal, just popped into my head one day. It wasn't something I overly thought about. I just had the title way before I had the book. So I'm not sure if Gabrielle Bernstein, who wrote this, had the same thing where she had a title and it just was there. But it's a great title. The subtitle is How to Feel Safe and Trust Your Life No Matter What. And feeling safe is absolutely what's missing for people with trauma. We don't have the sense of internal safety and neurological safety. It's missing because that part of us needs to be built by the connection with a safe other. And I've talked a lot about attunement and attachment and how that works. But anyway, so I thought this book was relevant, and it's a Hay House published book. And I've just started it, and it's very good. It's very straightforward in many ways. It's really a self-help development type book, which mine isn't, by the way. It's more about the physiology of what happens in the body when trauma affects us and how to overcome that. But it's overcoming it usually with help, specific therapy interventions, some of which you can do yourself, but it's not primarily a self-help book. This one is. And I was just very interested. My first thought, I'll be honest, was it isn't very big. And then I was looking at the price and I thought, well, okay, $10.99 in UK pounds. I guess that's about $14 or $15, I guess, not sure. And then I thought, this pricing thing is really interesting because I've priced mine at, I think it's 10 now, $9.99. So that's another big issue, isn't it? If you're a known, I mean, she's New York Times bestseller, I'm not. So one has to kind of think about what you're going to price your book as. And I think I've got the right balance between not being too cheap, but on the other hand, I can't charge too much for it as I'm an unknown. And mine has got, I have to say, a lot more research in there. Probably it's a more sciencey book, and there are diagrams and tables, and I've tried to make it totally accessible to a layperson, but there is science in there. There's things about mitochondria, which are the energy factories of your cell, for instance. I'm trying to explain how they shut down and why. So my book's a very different proposition, I guess, but I love all good writing, and inspiration comes to us in many different ways. And it just made me laugh that the universe has got your back. Literally fell onto my lap yesterday. So I thought I'd mention it. That's all for today. It's just really a little bit about the book and publishing. But if anybody wants to contact me and ask me about this, I'm very, very happy to field inquiries. And otherwise, if you're interested in the work that I do with clients, just get in touch on alchemytherapies.co.uk. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.